Hello, I'm Fernanda Albertoni. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the postgraduation program in Visual Arts in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And we'll be presenting today a paper called A Brazilian Améfrica Ladina, as recreated in the artwork of contemporary artists. Lélia Gonzalez is one of the intellectuals of the 1970s and 1980s in Brazil that foresaw the close connection between political democracy and racial democracy. A relationship that, given our current historical and political circumstances, still has to be critically debated until nowadays. Gonzalez argues that the so-called, in relation to that, and amplifying this issue of racial and political democracy in Brazil, thinking in a larger context of Latin America, Gonzalez argues that the so-called Latin America should instead be referred to as Améfrica Ladina. This nomination suggests a region that is not what he usually affirms to be. That is, countries that are mainly informed, that believe and try to pass their image that they are mainly formed by their European roots. Instead, Gonzalez suggests, their unconscious would show and denounce something else. This is a concept, the Améfrica Ladina, first coined by the psychoanalysts M. de Magno and Beth Milan, Brazilian psychoanalysts, but that has been used and expanded by Lélia Gonzalez. It is worth stressing here that the term Améfrica Ladina is not suggesting a pure African America, which would be freely centered in its Africanness or its blackness. But this name is underlining how a fanciful Latinity of the name should have its T exchanged for a D to get closer to its reality. That is, an America forged out of many ethnic groups, of which black populations were a great and fundamental part of, but that also pushed this blackness and its historical agency, its historical legacy, and also the conflicts implicit to the presence of those black populations in the Americas, all that has been pushed out of the center. A similar analysis, of course, could be made regarding the Amerindian central aspect of the continent. But the focus of my paper today here would be on the historical complexities and specificities of the blackness aspect of America. The act of pushing the blackness to the margins and trying to hide or deny it relates to Lélia Gonzalez's argument that the Brazilian culture it's a neurotic one. That is, Brazil to affirm itself at something very much close to supposed European heritage and to its official discourse of being a racial democracy, while unconsciously revealing both the Africans and blackness that it wants to repress and the racism that is connected to it. Gonzalez is basing her argument in the Freudian concept of denial, a process through which an individual defends themselves from their desire, of thoughts, of feelings, denying that it belongs to them. Nonetheless, despite or precisely in relationship to this denial, there is also resistance. Resistance in the sense of resistance to the oppression of this denial. And that, according to Gonzalez, in Brazil's case, is manifested very strongly in the culture and in the language. That is, the way there is a very colloquial use of the Portuguese language in Brazil. It's very much in dialogue of some of the phonetic sounds of some of the African languages that got interwoven in the social fabric of Brazil, as well as in cultural manifestations, in the religion, in the so-called Afro-Brazilian religions. So there is an Africanism in Brazil that, despite not represented in the official discourses, cannot be denied. Should not be denied, better said. To understand the dynamic between this official denial of the blackness or Africanism in Brazil, on the one hand, and on the other hand, a plural movement of resistance that's manifested in the language, in the lapses of language, in the diversity of culture in Brazil. So to understand this dialectic between denial and resistance, Gonzalez proposed that we think about two notions, conscious and memory. Gonzalez clarifies that she understands conscious as a construction by the official discourses. So it's a place that is truly a place of concealment, a place of alienation that causes forgetfulness because it excludes a great part of what would be actually part of Brazil's history. On the other hand, and as a kind of opposite notion, Gonzalez brings memory, which she understands not as the official memory that it's built by official discourses, but she's referring to memory in its very kind of alive, organic, plural ways of transmission of a culture and its memories within a society. So Gonzalez refers to memory as this place of not knowing that knows. So thinking about the society in relation to some sort of psychoanalytical terms she uses, the memory would be the place of the unconscious, where there is a lot of information and forces and potion kind of stored, but that often don't get rescued and brought in a clear way to the conscious level. But it's there. It's at work there in the unconscious. So Gonzalez also argues that because of this dialectical relationship, the conscious, which express the dominant speech, often excludes what memory includes. But memory, she argues, has its own cunning ways of speaking through lapses, of finding ways of transmission that not those of the official narratives. What we are interested here today is to examine how some art practice, contemporary art practice, can engage and widen these lapses and forms of resistance of memories and bring them more to the surface and translate them into some aesthetic poetic propositions. First, let's have a look at the work of the artist Jaime Lauriano, a work that is called América Nova Tabula, Invention, Epistemicide, Racial Contract and Genocide. Jaime Lauriano is a young Brazilian artist that often works with visual, symbolic and actual archives of Brazilian history, which, he argues, often tell very partial versions of history. We could sum up his practice as a sort of strategy of intervening and recontextualizing some of the archives and the material from these archives that he uses. That is, using those interventions, he uses those interventions he creates in certain archival materials to create, we could think metaphorically, in sort of bridges between what Gonzalez called the bias built conscious about Brazil's history, and the more organic, unconscious streams of memories. And those streams of memories, channelized by Lauriano to his work, can work against this artificial dam built by the official history, cracking a little bit its containing structures. We can see that, an example of that, looking at the work of Jaime Lauriano, which is an interpretation of a map of the New World, which not only exposes that there was a very unilateral racial contract that sustained the colonial endeavor, but also he does that, drawing this territory, this new territory, newly determined territory by Europeans, with contours, with black pemba, which is a candomblé chalk used in Afro-descendants religious rituals. So this chalk is used on those Afro religion rituals as a form of marking the floor with symbols and circumscribed territories, which it's believed that people that go inside those territories could feel the vibratory energies of this circumscribed area. So Lauriano creates an interesting tension here between a very westernized racial logic, which creates new territories, determine separations, while intervening at it with non-westernized logic of a spiritual relationship with a territory, with another form of inscription. As Leda Maria Martins, another great thinker of Brazil's Black memories, has argued, the official memory narratives in Brazil are based on the written form and the European rhetoric of tradition. And that is the case even when this written form is then translated into other forms of public commemorations and places of memory, such as museums, streets, monuments, which in the end are also translations of this original written texts of the Western rationality. But thinking about the importance of oral traditions, oral vernacular traditions in Brazil, Leda Maria Martins invite us to reflect about the memory environments. And this is a reference to Pierre Nora, differentiation between places of memory as part of this official materialization of memories, which can be distinguished into monuments, museums, street names, in a more kind of immaterial environment of memory, which he calls, which is often happens through social relations and forms of contact. So what Leda Maria Martins is underlining is that, according to her, in Brazil one finds the body, the voice, and the religious rituals as key places or even alive archives in which memories can be stored, transmitted, and importantly shifted. This shifting, this triple kind of process of storing, transmitting, shifting happens precisely because the body is a very alive archive where memories are not fixated into a specific form and maintained on that way, but by the repetition of a ritual, by a repetition of a body gesture, that is always how it's well described in studies about performances, a new inscription, a new sort of adulteration, a shifting of this memory. So memories are very much alive in this form of transmission and not fixated. But to analyze how some of the Améfrican memories have been transmitted by the body, and they can be also shifted from those kind of vernacular forms of transmission to this other environment of memory, which is the art field. We're gonna look at artwork by Yuri Cruz. Yuri Cruz is a young Brazilian artist who in 2019 had a solo exhibition called Pretofagia, or we could translate it to Blackphagia, which is a clear reference to the infamous Brazilian anthropophagic movement, but tensioning the very kind of white ethos of the modernist movement. So instead of anthropophagy, Yuri do this kind of language game and calls blackophagy, like blackophagy. In this show, which had objects appropriated and created by Yuri, and also the use of language which was put across the walls in the performance, the artist was expressing a very auto-reflexive process of self-formation. But instead of dealing with his identity in a kind of dialectical position, his black identity in a dialectical position to the whiteness, his movement was to define his blackness in relation to other black references. As Yuri sums up regarding his artworks, his interest is to move to, and I quote, nowhere else other than the center, to something that has been historically denied to the black people in the Brazilian society, that is the protagonism, end of quote. So the center as a place to bring forward the black protagonism and the complexity of an identity formation that is based on a blackness in relation to blackness, not in relation to whiteness, is something that we can distinguish very much in the performance that he presents in this show, where in collaboration of 6 other performers and actors, there is an autophagic process of interaction, confrontation, and exchange with those other black presences, references, and bodies in the formation, in the kind of sort of expansion of his own blacky self. Watching Cruz encounter interaction with these other bodies and references, one could witness a potent, creative, and critical process of becoming. This process can be related to ideas of important thinkers about race and blackness, such as Grada Quilomba and Bell Hooks, who in a similar way argue that it is through an act of taking ownership of a language, intervening in it, using it to its own aesthetic creation, that one can transit from the position of being objectified, that is, narrated by an external gaze, to a place of being the agent, the narrator of its own history. This is an important process, and we can identify a further step of Yuri in this direction towards his own center in another work that he developed at CIHA, Faraó Funfun, Pangeia, which was a hybrid kind of exhibition, scene and performance developed by Yuri in 3 acts. That is, there was a scenery he created, and he performed in collaboration with an actress in 3 consecutive nights. And this performance represented a short story created by Yuri, which is based on some of the stories of Oxalá and Anã, to a Orixá and a water divinity according to the Candomblé traditions, in which he translates those 2 characters to escura, which you can translate as dark, and tempo, which is time, and those 2 characters interact in the process of meeting the inscriptions or the first images of the world, according to this narrative of Yuri, and as a consequence creating life. So what Yuri proposes is his own version based on his traditions as a black person, as a person from a family that is a practitioner of candomblé, in a sort of another version, I say another, suggesting that Brazil being defined largely as a Christian country is very much connected to a specific version of the creation of the world. In this artwork, Yuri presents us another version based on his ancestral memories, in his traditions, in his references of a world creation. And reverently to the context of in which we are discussing the affirmation of Améfrica Ladina, in this work, Yuri also shows how this movement caused by the encounter between time and dark also generates a territory, Pangaea, which has also in the movement of the continental drift of Pangaea anticipates the African diaspora, and as a consequence also kind of gives shape for the first time in this narrative to the territory of the Americas. So Yuri is pointing out a very strong relationship between the African diaspora and the creation of this Améfrica Ladina, of which he's part, and he's again moving to the center of this territory, narrating its own creation. It's interesting to notice how, as elaborated by important thinkers for Black culture and memory, such as Grada Quilombo or François Fanon, they both use appropriation and creation of one's language. It's a key stage in taking ownership of its own history. And as Gonzalez quotes from Molefe Azante, all language is epistemic. Our language should contribute to the understanding of our reality. And what I argue here is that artworks such as from Jaime Lauriano and Yuri Cruz, when they appropriate both elements of their vernacular, the vernacular culture which they are part, and often translate that into languages which are used in the art field, such as performances or installation, or take references from the Western archives, such as the maps, the cartography. They are as well shifting the language from within. So promoting decoloniality, epistemological reconfiguration in many levels of their place within a national or regional narrative, of the forms, of the alternative forms, of different forms of memory formations, which should be part of the narratives of this Améfrican territory. Thank you very much.